Munich, 1982. Freddie Mercury sat alone in his hotel suite after another sold-out show, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't escape the feeling that everything he'd built was crumbling. Queen had just released Hot Space, an album that confused their fans and divided the band. Critics were brutal, radio stations weren't playing their singles, and worst of all, the four members of Queen could barely stand to be in the same room together. That night, Freddie made a confession to a close friend that would leak to the press and send shockwaves through the rock world. He said Queen was falling apart, and he didn't know if they could survive. If you want to hear the full story of what really happened that night and how Queen almost destroyed themselves, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss these untold rock stories. To understand how Queen reached this breaking point, you need to go back to 1980. They were untouchable. The Game album had just gone quadruple platinum. Another One Bites the Dust was dominating radio worldwide. They'd conquered America, Europe, South America, and even played behind the Iron Curtain. Freddie Mercury was the most electrifying frontman in rock history. Brian May's guitar work was legendary. Roger Taylor's drumming was thunderous. John Deacon's bass lines were infectious. Together, they created music that nobody else could touch. But success at that level comes with pressure that most people can't imagine. And by 1981, cracks were starting to show. The first sign of trouble came during the recording sessions for Hot Space. Queen had always been a democracy. All four members contributed songs. All four had a say in the direction. But Freddie had fallen in love with disco and funk. He wanted to experiment, to push boundaries, to do something different. Brian May hated it. He was a rock guitarist, a traditionist, someone who believed Queen's strength was in their rock opera sound and their guitar-driven anthems. Roger Taylor was caught in the middle, wanting to support Freddie but also understanding Brian's concerns. John Deacon, always the quiet one, kept his opinions to himself, but you could see the frustration in his eyes during studio sessions. The arguments were constant. Freddie would suggest a funk rhythm or a synthesizer line, and Brian would shut it down. Brian would propose a guitar solo, and Freddie would say it was old-fashioned. Sessions that used to take hours now took days. The chemistry that made Queen special was evaporating. They recorded Body Language, a funk track with explicit lyrics that made Brian uncomfortable. They recorded Staying Power with a horn section that felt nothing like Queen. And when they finally released the album in May 1982, the reaction was devastating. Fans didn't know what to make of it. This wasn't the Queen that gave them Bohemian Rhapsody or We Will Rock You or Somebody to Love. This was something strange and unfamiliar. Critics were even harsher. They called it a betrayal, a sellout, a disaster. Sales were disappointing compared to their previous albums. Radio stations that used to play every Queen single now avoided them. And the worst part was that each member of the band blamed the others. Freddie felt betrayed because his artistic vision had been compromised. Brian felt betrayed because he'd been pressured into making music he didn't believe in. Roger and John felt stuck between two egos that refused to budge. Then came the tour. The Hot Space tour started in Europe in April 1982, and from the very first show, you could feel the tension. Backstage, the band members traveled separately, stayed in different hotels, barely spoke to each other except when they had to. On stage, they were professionals. They still delivered incredible performances because that's what Queen did. But the moment the show ended, they went their separate ways. Freddie would disappear into Munich's nightclub scene, surrounding himself with a new crowd of friends who had nothing to do with music. Brian would retreat to his room, depressed and wondering if this was the end. Roger and John tried to keep things together, but even they were losing hope. One night in Munich, after a particularly tense show, Freddie invited a journalist friend to his suite. He'd been drinking, and the walls he usually kept up were down. The journalist later recounted the conversation, and it painted a picture of a man who was lost. Freddie talked about how Queen didn't feel like a band anymore. He said they'd become 4 solo artists forced to work together, that the magic was gone, that he didn't know if they could find it again. He admitted that he was partly to blame, that his obsession with trying new sounds had pushed the others away. But he also said he felt trapped, like Queen had become a prison instead of a creative outlet. The journalist asked if Queen was breaking up. Freddie didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. He said something worse. He said he didn't know. For a man who'd always been so confident, so sure of himself and his band, that admission was devastating. And when that conversation leaked to the press a few weeks later, it confirmed what fans had been fearing. Queen was in crisis. The media went crazy. Headlines screamed about Queen's breakup. Fans panicked. Record executives pressured the band to make a statement, but Queen stayed silent because they didn't know what to say. Behind the scenes, they were having emergency meetings, trying to figure out if they even wanted to continue. Brian seriously considered leaving. He'd been offered solo opportunities, and the idea of not having to fight for every creative decision was tempting. Freddie was torn between his loyalty to Queen and his desire for artistic freedom. Roger and John, always the glue that held things together, were exhausted from playing mediator. What saved Queen was something unexpected. In July 1982, they were scheduled to play Milton Keynes Bowl in England. It was supposed to be the final show of the Hot Space Tour, and everyone assumed it might be the final Queen show ever. But something happened when they walked on stage that day. They looked out at 70,000 fans singing every word to every song, and they remembered why they'd started this band in the first place. It wasn't about egos or creative control or who was right and who was wrong. It was about the music and the connection with the audience and the joy of creating something bigger than themselves. After the show, they sat down together for the first time in months and really talked. No accusations, no arguments, just honesty. Freddie admitted he'd been selfish, pushing his vision without considering the others. Brian admitted he'd been rigid, refusing to compromise. They all acknowledged that Hot Space had been a mistake, not because it was a bad album, but because they'd made it for the wrong reasons. They'd been trying to prove something instead of creating from a genuine place, and they made a pact. If they were going to continue as Queen, they had to go back to what made them great. Collaboration, not competition. Trust, not control. The result was The Works, released in 1984. Radio Gaga, I Want to Break Free, Hammer to Fall. Songs that combined Freddie's pop sensibilities with Brian's rock foundations. Songs that felt like Queen again. The album was a massive success, and it proved they could survive their darkest moment. But the scars from 1982 never fully healed. The band members never quite recaptured that early innocence, that pure joy of making music together. There was always a little distance, a little guardedness, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Looking back now, that night in Munich when Freddie admitted Queen was falling apart wasn't the end of the story. It was the turning point. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom before you can rebuild. Sometimes you have to almost lose everything to remember why it mattered in the first place. Queen survived because they chose to fight for each other instead of against each other. But the price was high, and the band that emerged from that crisis was different from the one that went in. If you found this story as powerful as I did, make sure to turn on notifications so you catch every video. And if you want to hear more untold stories from rock history, check out the video on screen right now about the night Keith Richards saved the Rolling Stones from destruction. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.